Hey guys, this is Joe D. Roundhouse for the Roundhouse Report. It's March 31st. Happy Easter at about 4:15. I haven't made a video in probably a year or two, and that's because of health issues that I've been experiencing. My guy Bob, he straight up was like, "Look, where you been? Why aren't you making any videos?" So I said, "All right, listen, I'll make something for you special, you know." So this is for Mr. Bob out there, okay? You know who you are. I've been doing, let me try to get this fan out of the picture if I can, so that way you're not being distracted by the fan. There we go. As you know, I don't have a very professional setup, but I think it's what's in the head, not what's in the background. So you still got a little flipper, but whatever. So let's start with Russia. This is going to be real quick because I haven't done one of these videos for 2 years. So I'm kind of out of shape. I haven't taken any notes, but I've been watching every freaking day, especially Israel. Last spring and summer, when I'm going to start with Russia and the Ukraine war. Last spring and summer, the Ukrainians launched their counteroffensive, and they were hoping that it would be as successful as their Kharkiv or Kherson offensive, which was the previous year. But instead of that, as you know, the three certain, I forget what they're called, but the three lines of defenses were, you have Dragon's Teeth, which are like little diamonds of concrete that stick up in the air and screw up tanks. Rows of Dragon Teeth for miles. Trench systems, flexible trench systems, which means you have one trench here, you have another trench here, you have another trench over here, and you mutually re-support each other as the fight wears on. So this trench could potentially bend into the other one. So it's I don't know if I'm doing it justice with my hands, but it was a 3-layer defense system. The Ukrainians got through the first 2, and then they got stuck because they were making pretty good progress, and the Russians moved everything down in the south, Robotyne in that area. Since then, because of the Israeli-Hamas war, well, even before that, this BS about drib-drabbing aid. I mean, okay, for instance, I don't know what the last package was. The current package that's stalled in the U.S. Congress is for $60 billion. For just example's sake, let's say that there was a bill fit. I mean, I don't know all the different bills by heart, but the last package, let's say, was for $40 billion. Let's just say that $40 billion's here, right? The Ukrainians need it all now, right? Instead of getting like 50 shells a week and being like, next week we'll get 50 more, and just slowly drib and drab it out. We'll give you a tank next week. Like $60 billion is almost 1/8 of what the United States spends on its own military per year. We spend about $800+ billion. We've already contributed multiple hundreds of billions of dollars into the Ukrainian war effort. So the problem is the Europeans they don't have a war industry like the United States does. They spend a lot of their excess funds on social welfare programs because they know that they're under the U.S. nuclear umbrella. But now after Russia, they're starting to bump up, especially the Baltic nations, Latvia, Estonia, forget the other one. They're all bumping up, like, you know, GDP is supposed to be 2%. You're supposed to contribute to NATO. Some of these countries are putting 3%, 4% in because they're afraid, because they see what Russia's been doing in Ukraine. The main reason, from what I can tell based on what I've seen and read, is that the reason that the Ukrainians aren't doing so hot right now is because they don't have any freaking artillery shells. This is like World War I version 2. The modern version of World War I. World War I was a trench. You shelled each other like crazy, and then this trench would decide to go across no man's land and attack this trench, and it'd be hitting with machine guns, and it'd be just a freaking nightmare. All right, it's not quite that bad nowadays. It's a little bit more precision tech and everything. But I don't know what the exact figure is. I think it's 10. I think they use something like 10,000 shells in like half a day or something. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think they were given 30,000 shells by one country recently. And what I read was that was good for about 2 weeks. So what we're dealing with here is Russian artillery, which is coming in, and then you have counter battery. Counter battery means you have a sophisticated, which we provided to them, a sophisticated enough radar system where as soon as artillery is fired from the Russians, for instance, and it starts to land, that radar immediately picks up exactly where they are. And then immediate precision fired counter battery can be employed. So you'll be destroying their artillery pieces and their formations. But when you have your enemy firing 10 times as many shells per day as you are, for every 10 Russian shells, you can afford to use one. See, it wasn't like that back in this past summer and past spring. There were always dips in ammunition, but generally speaking, the Ukrainians, for their spring offensive, which was a failure, when they moved south into Robotyne and other areas in southern Ukraine, it was a failure. They made some good gains, but I think that showed the world just how important trenches still are. We're actually undergoing new training for the U.S. military regarding how to make trench systems. This is something we didn't think we'd have to do again. How to make intricate trench systems, how to have supporting fire, counter battery fire, basically in war of attrition, which is what Ukraine and Russia is doing. So for every 10 shells that Russia launches against Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainians can launch about one back. So they're on the defensive. They lost Andrika. They lost that a number of weeks ago. They're being slowly pushed back. Right now, they're currently on a water line of different rivers and lakes that they can try to hold. They've been putting dragon teeth, those circular, those triangular concrete things. They've been putting those out everywhere. I think what they're trying to do is emulate what Russia did last spring, which was dig those three main fortifying lines. They were known as the three lines of fortification. And I think the Ukrainians learned a lot from that, and they're trying to replicate it. So they are indeed replicating it. So if they are as successful as the Russians were last spring, then Russia shouldn't have a whole lot more area to move through without heavy contestation. The bottom line is Ukraine needs artillery shells. That's the biggest thing. The Europeans, they can't make enough at a time. The United States, we're running out of our stockpiles. But the bottom line is, though, when you pass a bill for 60, which is it's been held up in the U.S. Congress, but the recent bill for $60 billion, again, almost 1/8 of our military budget in the United States, $60 billion, great, right? That's supposed to be good. Regardless of what side you're on, regarding just basic military strategy and production and manufacturing understanding, $60 billion is going to be a boon for them, obviously. And that's going to include a certain number of shells, mostly artillery shells, long-range stuff, HIMAR, more HIMARS, more ammunition for those HIMARS, which has very, very direct precision strike capability. That's been actually the bane of Russia, has been the United States provided HIMARS, because they release such a concentration of ammunition at one time, and they saturate such a big space at one time, that's been one of the best weapons that they've used. Well, they're running out of HIMAR ammo. They're running out of 155 ammo. They're running out of traditional, just World War I-esque type artillery shells. They're just running out. So, okay, the $60 billion that we have coming up, all right, the way it's been working since this war started is $5 billion will go to Ukraine, and they'll be like, here's 10 tanks and 10,000 rounds of shells. And they're like, all right, the shells are gone in one day. So it's like, here's $5 billion every week, $5 billion, $5 billion, $5 billion, $5 billion, until you get to 60. What they need to do, in my opinion, the United States and the Europeans need to work together to make a monster package of, and I know this is going to bleed the defense system, the defense industries of both Europe and the United States, and I'm well aware that especially the Europeans, they don't have these stocks to be able to do this. They've relied on America to protect them. But even the United States is running out of stuff, so I sure hope we've quadrupled our own production. But if we could work in tandem with the Europeans, if we put forth a $60 billion bill, and the Europeans put forth, relatively speaking, it's going to be much lesser. Let's say they put forth a $10 billion bill. You combine the $7 billion, you find out $70. You find out exactly what's needed, which the main thing is artillery shells. Artillery, HIMAR, precision weapons, and just basic ammunition and basic refitting gear. But the main thing that I've been seeing over and over and over again, not only from Zelensky's office in Kiev, not only from his generals, but from many private analysts, it's even the Ukrainian generals have come out and said, look, we may not have lost Andrinka had we had more artillery shells. It's really a battle of attrition. It's just like World War I. So, like I said, you have the Russians firing 10. The Ukrainians can only afford to fire 1 because they have to preserve their stuff, because the Russians are coming. The Russians have been making great battlefield advances, relatively speaking. I think that the Ukrainians have learned a lot from last spring and last summer regarding punching into those 3 lines of fortifications in southern Ukraine. The Donetsk River, Zakaria, I'm not pronouncing this crap right. I don't know how to pronounce it. Zaporizhia, Robotyne, and that whole area where they were making incremental progress throughout the spring and summer, and then they got rolled back, and then the Russians started pushing in from the east, and it's just been losing territory. So what they need to do, and that's the point of this video, I'll make a separate Israel one. Bob, you tell me if you want a separate Israel one, okay? You just tell me. What they need to do is put those, let's say, $60 billion from us, which is currently on the table in Congress, stalled, obviously. And keep in mind, the Israel-Gaza war is siphoning off ammo from us as well that we could have sent to Ukraine. And I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with us sending crap to Ukraine. I'm just looking at it from an objective point of view that they need artillery shells. So if they have a $70 billion package, $60 billion from the U.S., $10 billion from the United States, then they would be able to, if they tried, instead of doing a drib and drab, every week we're going to give you a little bit, but we're not going to give you enough at one time so that you can potentially even launch counteroffensives right here and now. We're not going to give you enough. We're going to let it just 5,000 artillery shells per week. They say, look, 5,000 are done in an hour. We need more than 5,000 a week. So if this $60 billion aid package, and let's say the Europeans have their own $10 billion aid package because they have resources that go elsewhere for social works and programs like that, we could put together a comprehensive package mainly of artillery shells, HIMARS, restocking HIMAR, high precision weapons, missiles, providing tanks, providing armored personnel carriers. I don't know exactly what the $60 billion thing from the U.S. is covering, but I'm assuming that's primarily it. And so if Ukraine, if they were to get that whole $70 billion package, shells, tanks, personnel carriers, man-pad weapons, if they were to get all of that in one boom, is there, they would have everything that they would need to hold off the Russians, and they could potentially even launch a counteroffensive. But because of the drib and drab of the United States and of Europe, I mean, for instance, it took 11 months to send 16 Abrams. It took 11 months for us to move 16 almost decommissioned, refitted them. And it took us 16 months to get them 16 Abrams tanks. That is insane. The United States force projection, you see what we do with Israel. As soon as Israel was attacked on October 7th, suddenly we have two aircraft carrier battle groups, which is what you mean business with. That's when you go to wars, when you have 2 of them. And that shut down a lot of heat from the Middle East, but that'll be for another video. Bob, you tell me if you want that video, okay? So the ammunition, but the problem is, you know, the United States, the Europeans, if they're giving all their crap to Ukraine, what are they going to fight with? So I'm hoping every country is like quadrupling their defense spending and the expansion of their defense industry, their weapons defense industry. And if Ukraine were to get all that $60 billion plus whatever from the Europeans all at once in one big package, not something that's going to be dribbed and drabbed out for the rest of 2024 and into 2025. No, one package full of all sorts of ammunition and everything that you would need. That would put them in a good position. So right now, the main issue is attrition. The Russians are firing 10 shells per one Ukrainian shell, because the Ukrainians have to save them. they're on defense right now. They're building trenches, Dragon's Teeth networks. They're on the defensive big time. So they need to be able to out attrition the Russians. And for a while there, they were able to. But again, that's because of heavy support from the United States. Right now, especially with Israel, things have been siphoned off. The politicalization of the U.S. Congress, the Senate, is absurd, as you all know. The executive branch, the judicial branch, the legislative, I mean, everything's, identity politics, and we're going to do this if you do that. If they're really serious about Ukraine, send all $60 billion at one time. Don't make them wait 3 years for one package, and then see how they do. Because at this point, they're on the defensive. They just need artillery shells. And I've seen a Russian general in one of his statements from Ukraine say that had we had more artillery shells and had we had more air defense weapons, that the Russians would have never been able to take Andrinka, or if they did, it would have taken substantially longer, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, which would have ground down the Russians more. So that's my basic video. Ukraine needs artillery weapons. Boom. They need artillery weapons. They have the actual material in terms of the systems, the artilleries, the howitzers. They're getting knocked out every day, though. So not only are they need artillery shells, but they need new artillery. They need refitted tanks, refitted armored personnel characters, just regular ammunition for an AR-15. So until the West gets serious about giving them one thing at once instead of drib-drabbing it, this is just going to prolong the war more and more and more. All right, it's Jody Roundhouse coming in Sunday the 31st. Happy Easter again. Bob, let me know what you think.